So good morning, everybody. I'm Alex Castro. Did anybody see yesterday that Elon, the announcement from Elon Musk? Did anybody? You saw that? What do you think of that?
Ambitious.
So,
Leaving me out, I can't afford it.
I don't know. Did you see how much it was going to cost?
No,
I don't know if they published it.
they didn't.
Right. So it's this year, right? Yeah. Yeah. So this year they're going to land 2 tourists on the moon.
No, they're going to circle the moon.
Oh, they're going to circle? I thought they were going to land it. Or they're just going to take them and circle them around the moon?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I thought that was pretty cool. Right? Has anybody bought a new car recently? Okay. If you don't mind me, did you lease or buy it?
Buy it.
You bought it. Anybody lease it? No. Okay. So, the reason I kind of bring up the Elon Musk thing a little bit, and leasing cars and things like that, is that we're seeing a significant shift today where people don't want to go through the process anymore, right? So for myself, it's like I use Spotify for my music. I used to buy CDs like crazy, right? So I used to have these stacks of CDs, and you want them to make your mix CD or your mix track or whatever you're going to do, right? So you're going to compilate everything. But I rent my music now. I rent my phone service, my cable service. I own my cars. I own my house. I don't lease them. But the movement is going in that direction. And the thing that I wanted to just offer this morning was that, and the topic that I'll go over is the fact that the velocity and the speed of the life that we live today, people don't have time to go through the process anymore, right? Everybody wants to buy the outcome, and if the outcome isn't right there at our fingertips, people move on, right? And I think we're all driving that, right? We're all the people who drive that on a daily basis, right? If we get an app and somebody says, hey, that app is fantastic, and we load it on our phone and we try to use it and it doesn't do exactly what we thought it was going to be, we dump it and we move on, right? And so we've been sort of trained to live in this world, and as the millennials start to come through, there's 75 million of them, and there's 72 million baby boomers. So the millennials outnumber the baby boomers. The problem is that millennials don't have any money, right? And they don't generate any kind of wealth, right? They generate experiences, and they're all about the experience. So it's a little bit different in the thinking process, right? Because every time I bring this up with a baby boomer, they're like, yeah, but we're the ones with all the money, right? So they hold on to that sort of staying power. So as we kind of go through this, I want to kind of kick off by talking about the fact that a lot of our thought process over the last maybe 20 years in our careers has been really grounded as professionals about justifying why we're going to do something, right? It's the whole, is it the right value? Is it the right business case? Are the financials there to support it? Does it make sense? The whole process, right? And it's always, well, should you do this, right? Well, we're moving into an era of can you do it? Because the difficulty is that ideas versus execution are 2 completely different things, right? In the sense of what are you buying? Are you buying a project or are you buying an outcome? Because you can't buy both. You're picking, right? And people want to insist that you can buy both, but you can't, right? Because things just move too fast. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, in the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 have disappeared, don't exist anymore. In 1955, the average life expectancy for a Fortune 500 company was about 75 years. As of last year, it's 15 years, right? And so the question I usually get around that is, well, is it that they're going out of business? Or it's like, they're either going out of business or they're gobbling each other up. Because the difficulty is that in our world today, and it doesn't get presented very often, but the issue is that there's no growth. There's no growth in private sector, right? So if you're a private sector company, you are not organically growing. It is impossible. What you're doing is you're going out and you are either acquiring somebody else's customer or you're buying a company to do your growth. But you can't grow because you can't raise your prices because nobody's going to pay more. People expect to pay less. So the economy, in essence, globally is flat, and it's driving Fortune 500 CEOs nuts, just absolutely nuts. So 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with the executives from Johnson & Johnson, right? And their entire growth strategy, their entire survival strategy is based on acquisition, right? And the way that they're managing it is, how much money can I save in my core business to accumulate purchasing power so I can go out and buy the next company that's either got a new device, a new drug, a new market, whatever. But their salespeople can't make their numbers. Oracle salespeople can't make their numbers. The biggest thing that, I got a tickler yesterday from somebody was all those firms that are out there that have built their entire base around doing services for Oracle. Oracle's now turning around and competing directly against them because Oracle can't make their numbers. And they rotate their salespeople every 6 to 9 months because they can't make their numbers. Because there's no growth. It's completely flat, right? And so this is having an impact, right? And the average strategy in corporate America today, because one of our other platform products specifically targets Fortune 500 companies, and we work with executives within the Fortune 500 space, is that they don't do this annual strategic planning anymore. That doesn't exist. They reassess and revamp their strategy every 3 to 4 months. And it changes pretty significantly. The other piece that's happening is that, and you guys I'm sure are seeing this, is the obsolescence acceleration in software. So if you buy a piece of software today, typically it's 18 months, but it's moving into a yearly full upgrade in that software. So if you have a software package that you've done custom configuration around, within 3 years, the amount of full change in that software package basically violates most of the customizations that you did in year 1, right? And it's accelerating. It's not getting any slower. Intuit releases 64 new things a month. They make 64 changes to their software every month on a continuous model. And so the bottom line is we live in a subscription economy between my Spotify account, my Netflix account, my cell phone. There's a significant change in the way that we behave, right? So landlines, in 2004, 92% of households had a landline, right? In 2016, 40% of houses have a landline, okay? Uber, Lyft, people aren't buying cars. The car market's declining 3% per year on average, right? Toyota lost, Nissan lost 6.5% last year in car sales. And they're expecting that decline year over year, right? Because people are subscribing to serve it. And frankly, I can't wait till self-driving cars. I mean, it's like, I am like so excited for that. I can't even begin to tell you. It's like, my kids are tired of me saying it. I cannot wait for self-driving cars, right? Netflix, Amazon, the cable, dish, all that declining around 3% a year. Because people are simply subscribing, right? Most of the millennials that I know don't have cable service. They don't have the traditional things, the infrastructure that, sort of my generation, or me, I should say, I can't speak for my generation, but that I would have acquired, a landline, cable service, all those types of things, right? So the way that this also is beginning to impact government is you're starting to see that the state really doesn't own its own infrastructure, right? For the most part, the state doesn't, government doesn't own its own buildings. They lease their buildings. They have somebody else build the building, own the building, the asset, have to maintain the asset, and they lease it, right? So all of you work in leased buildings. I think last I read there was like 20 million square feet leased in the state of California, active basis. And the same thing with toll roads, right? So the toll roads that tend to be in Southern California, all of that's privately financed. None of it is paid through taxpayer dollars. The state does not own the toll road. The state does not have any investment in that toll road. A private operator actually invests in the toll road, builds it, runs it, maintains it for like a 20-year period, and every time you drive on it, you pay, every time you pay that toll, you're paying a toll to a private operator. You're not paying it to the state, right? That's how infrastructure is developed, right? So I'm hoping that this begins to sort of kind of shed light on a little bit of a pattern that's going on in terms of the market. So really what we're looking at is that there's this global transformation of buying outcomes, right? So in the 1970s, we all bought products, right? And mainframes and specific softwares, and it was all about the products. And in the 80s and 90s, we added services into that. So now you started to bring in the IBMs and Accentures or Anderson Consulting and different folks to do the services component. And that lasted for about 20 years. And then in the 2000s, you really started to take a look at this sort of solution-centric piece, right? So you'd have vendors out there that were talking about solutions. Oh, we've built a case management system that does this, a financial management system that does that. And they've documented it all out, and they're talking about their solution sets, and they're going through all the different things that they've got, right? Today, the economy is about outcome. It's an outcome-centric economy, right? So people don't want to travel that path, right? So how many people have done a project in the last 2 years? They've been involved in some kind of a project, right? If you had the ability that you said, okay, we're going to do our project, and these are the things that I need, these are the outcomes that I need, and you had the choice of going through the, I guess, 9 months that it took you to do it, a year it took you to do it, right? Or I could sign up for a service and have it in a month. Which one would you have done? Do you want to go through the project? Do you want to go through that process? Is that what you want? Or do you want the outcome? Do you want the outcome of the project? A system that I put data into, collects information, puts out reports, cuts checks, whatever it may be, right? And the majority of people are going to say, it's like, yeah, that's really interesting, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that anymore. Because we're being trained not to do that, right? Again, if I download something on my phone, it doesn't work the way I want it to, I delete it and I move on to the next thing. It doesn't exist that way anymore. Right? And so it's an outcome-centric economy. People want to buy the outcome. I don't want to travel the journey of doing it. That's why I don't have, if I want a new car, I don't go to some body shop or whatever and say, build me a car, and I'm going to spec out the car, right? That's why the majority of people don't buy custom homes. They buy track homes. Okay? I want to see it. I want to see it built. I want to see that it works. I want to know that it's solid. And when you, selling person, have shown me that all this stuff is real, I'm going to buy it. And you're going to give me a warranty, and I'm going to have the ability to bring it back for any fixes. But I don't own it. I don't own the construction of that thing. When I lease a building for the state of California, I do not own the problems in the building. If the sewer line goes bad, owner, you fix it, right? And so there's a model that's really pushing hard. So, Gartner started to take a look at that type of stuff. And what they're finding is that the approach of building static infrastructure cannot keep up with the needs of the business units, because the business units are moving so rapidly. Even in government, between legislative and federal changes, the business units are moving too fast. Right? You don't have this static world where you put a mainframe in and you've got 25 years to use that mainframe. Right? It just moves too quickly. So you start to go in, you start to do the research, right? And you start to do the math a little bit around how it's all working. And these are the chaos report numbers. There's like all kinds of other numbers out there, right? Because Agile's the big movement, right? And we also work with like gaming companies. And it's funny because when I have conversations with gaming companies, when I talk about Agile in the private sector, it's like talking about mainframe in the public sector. Agile's legacy in private sector, right? You talk about Agile practices in the private sector, and they're like, yeah, we've been doing that for 15 years, 20 years, right? We're already moving on to the next iteration of whatever that is. Right? And so if you look at Agile overall, you're looking at a little bit higher success rate And these metrics are for larger projects, so anything that's over about $10 million in size. And so out of it, about 21% are really successful. 60% of them are challenged, meaning they've got, typically what happens, when you say challenge, that basically means you got 60% of scope at 140% of cost. That's challenged, right, which is the norm. And then failed is failed, right? It just didn't work at all, right? So waterfall has got a much lower success rate, roughly about the same on the challenge side, much higher on the failure side. So kind of get the temperature of people. Is there another industry, or is there anybody else that, in any other space that you guys would say is a higher risk environment? I mean, is private sector higher risk in the context? Or when you guys think of risk models for deployment of technology and deployment of solutions, what would you think is the highest risk thing? Kind of trying to feed you on this one. It's like, what's that?
We haven't had our second cup of coffee.
You haven't had your second cup of coffee yet? All right, so I'll try to clue you. What's one of the big things in Silicon Valley? What's the highest risk thing in Silicon Valley you can think of? Man, that is a rabbit hole in itself. But if you're going to go to Silicon Valley and you're looking at the risk profile in Silicon Valley, who are the people who? What's that? You don't know? Right. So venture capital. I'm just trying to get you to venture capital. Right? People think of VCs as like the high risk guys, the high roller guys. Right? I always love this statistic. So VCs have a 25% success rate. Right? So about 20% of their projects have got a muddled response, and about 55% are flat out failures. So the failure rate's much higher. Right? And the point that comes out of the data is that current practices for making decisions, deploying systems, doing this work, and owning this work, right, has a higher risk factor than if you were a VC in the Valley. So within the confines of government, when I present these slides to the Florida legislature people, they get so pissed because they're so conservative. But system implementation within government is higher risk than funding a startup. Right? And people would think, no way. There's just no way that's possible. We have all these filters. We have all these mechanisms. We're doing these checks. Right? And the numbers are not numbers that I've created. These are numbers that have been coming back for the last 15 years. Government projects are higher risk than investing in a startup as a venture capital in Silicon Valley. Well, the difficulty is you can't compare it's apples and oranges, right? Because you're doing citizen value, right? You're helping people. How do you put a value on helping somebody, right? In the sense that if you help somebody eat that month or pay their rent or, put their kid through school or whatever, that's a tough metric, I think, right? So it's very unique in that context. But from an implementation perspective, from a success rate perspective, VCs have a higher success rate than government does in implementing systems. Right? And that's tough to absorb for a lot of folks, right? And that conversation goes around, and there's a lot of scrutiny, and there's a lot of angst around it. But the numbers are the numbers. The data is the data. So compounding this is the fact that millennials, on average, have a 3.6-year lifespan within public service. Within 3.6 years, a millennial from the day they start will bounce within 3.6 years. So millennials are not building the longevity of their careers as a group within the there are people who do stay, but as a group, for the most part, it's a 3.6 average bounce rate in terms of turnover. So the difficulty is that bringing people up through the system and maturing them through the process of understanding how government works, how budgeting works, right? Because I don't know how many of you remember the days like maybe 15, 20 years ago, right? When you were like fresh in government, you would have to go over to, the ledge and defend, some budgeting stuff, right? You were involved, you're very deeply involved in the budgeting process, the legislative process, in being part of program. And you learned a lot about how the rhythm of government worked, right? And then there was this sudden dramatic shift where analysts weren't allowed to go over to the LAO's office anymore, right? And they weren't allowed to have those conversations anymore. And so suddenly that learning curve went away, right? Because it was just the executives that were going over. And so now you have an issue where you have younger people coming in and they don't have that training. They're not getting mentored through the process, so there's a lot of disconnect in terms of how the funding process works and the budgeting process works and how you deal with those things, right? So you all can see that projects over $3 million typically take around 4 to 5 years to procure. And then so the other metric that's out right now is that the average lifespan of a system that you implement today is about 5 years. So let's say you have a $3 million system you're implementing, the life cycle of that is going to be about 5 years. Because if you look at that obsolescence rate, like SharePoint gets released every year. There's a brand new version of SharePoint as an example that gets released every year, right? So let's say that you've done custom configuration around that and you're just doing the standard maintenance and those types of things. By year 5, you're on your 5th version of SharePoint, which is going to wind up breaking a lot of the stuff that you configured in year 1 and 2, right? And so you're either doing a continuous modernization process or you're going to have to do a full rewrite in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. Right? And so the obsolescence rate is very, very accelerated these days. And it comes not because they have these designs to make government pay more money, right? Where the obsolescence rate is accelerating and why it's accelerating is because when I'm sitting with PayPal executives and they're talking about the things that they need, they're pushing Oracle to go buy a company in the marketplace, right? Because they need certain functionality to be able to meet their own needs in terms of what they're providing to the market. Because remember, their strategy is shifting every 3 to 4 months, right? And so as they're pushing companies like Oracle and IBM and SAP and fill in the blank, Microsoft, right? Those companies are having to respond with new functionality in order to maintain the relationships and the size of the relationships that they have with these private sector companies, because these private sector companies represent between 60 to 75% of their base revenue. Okay? And if they don't, they'll get attritioned, and that company will move to the next startup, to the next new idea, the up and coming. Right? Or to another company that's made the acquisition and integrated it in. And so that pace is accelerating because private sector works in a leapfrog mentality. Right? It used to be that somebody would release this thing, like a car, right, with navigation, and then somebody else would release their car with navigation, right? And so you'd have this parity process, right? Well, today somebody releases a car with navigation, and then they release a car with 3D navigation and Bluetooth. And then somebody else, really, right? And so there's this leapfrog process that has to happen because the people who are in this room today, us, the consumers of these goods, are saying, why am I going to buy parity? I want to buy parity plus 1. So they're having to keep up. And that's driving and accelerating those changes in the marketplace, right? And traditionally, government is a consumer, not a driver, right? Because government takes a very conservative position. They, it's their fiduciary responsibility within the context of the dollars that they have, taxpayer dollars, to make the most of them. So you don't want to be on that bleeding edge side. You don't want to take those risks, right? You want to see how does it work in the market, and then we want to apply it within the context of government because we want to know that it works. The difficulty is that those leaps are so fast right now that by the time you get to the decision point, you're like 3 or 4 versions behind, and companies are consolidating all these different functionality points, and you're saying, hey, what the heck, right? I bought the tool at the beginning of the project. By the time I go live, I've already got to do 2 or 3 upgrades to that tool. right? Fiscal's having to do a full PeopleSoft upgrade in the middle of the project. Was anybody aware of that? Right? A full upgrade. Not like, you know, let me give you a patch. Right? A full version upgrade in the middle of the project. That's a significant thing, right? Because that didn't happen like 10 years ago, right? There was stability. You bought the software and you ran with it, right? And today, those versions are coming faster and faster. And so the obsolescence rate combined with the length of time of procurement, combined with the fact that you've got people in service who are attritioning faster than ever, you don't have the knowledge base, and the acceleration is hitting.